group. And it's just like people kind of characterize millennials as one morass of lazy kids. Like we could do the same thing with baby boomers, but but number one, I want to say don't ever use the word lazy or entitled when you're describing this younger generation. It is so disrespectful. And it doesn't continue a conversation that actually allows us to welcome in these new people. So meanwhile, let's talk about baby boomers, this older generation, very large. Trailing boomers are the younger boomers. And right now, when we look across the country at the percent of owner-occupied homes owned by trailing boomers, it varies from just under 20% to over 24%. And of course, you've got a few more people in kind of the metropolitan fringe. When you look at leading boomers, now this is where these are the older baby boomers, where those folks are mostly around the West, starting to see Nebraska pick up on here's like the beachfront, right, of the leading boomer growth. And now let's look at the percent of owner-occupied homes owned by people over the age of 75. This is the one that made me say, oh my gosh. Over 35% of the homes in many of these communities across Nebraska are owned by people over the age of 75. They are not going to be in these homes forever. And so now this becomes the question. So there's an indicator we use. There's a rural-urban continuum code, which you can kind of classify each county into how urban it is or how rural it is. And we look at the percentage of owner-occupied homes by urbanity or rurality, by trailing boomers, leading boomers, and people over the age of 75 today. And we see that really baby boomer compositions don't really matter between urban and rural places. Both places have about, what, a quarter of the population, 45% of the population, 44% of the population that are baby boomers. But what is significantly different are the percentage of homeowners that are over the age of 75. In our urban places, it's 1 in 5 households, but in our most rural places, it's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 homes right now are owned by people over the age of 75. And more importantly, those homes are going to turn over within the next 5 to 7 years. So we have this conversation out there about workforce housing shortage. And this is a good problem to have in many ways because, again, this goes against the narrative. If the predominant narrative about rural is that there's nobody living there, then why can't you find anywhere to live? Why are our housing stocks all filled up, right? This doesn't make any sense from the narrative side that, why is it that I can't find a place to live when I want to move to a rural community? So I kind of comically say that we don't really have a workforce housing shortage. There's plenty of workforce housing. It's currently occupied by our seniors. So we are going to see a tremendous number of homes open up over the next really 20 years. Because when you add these two together, right, when you add all these together, what percentage of your homes now are going to turn over in the next 20 years? 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, almost 80% of our homes in rural communities are going to turn over in the next 20 years. Now, of course, this raises many other questions about how welcoming is our community? What do we do to actually bring in new people? How do we talk about ourselves? And that gets back to the rural narrative, which you've heard, if you participate in the first session, you'll hear about that. So when we look at all these different counties, what I want to point some attention to are a couple things. Like here's the baby boomers, right? The 2 bars of baby boomers. And in the year 2000, they were 35 to 54. And then in 2010, they were, 10 years older. So those 2 bars move over. And now we are going to be in 2020. Next year we'll have the new census, and those bars are going to be moved over even more. And what we see here in Franklin County, a full 40% of homes are owned by people. They were 65 in 2010. They're 75 today. 40% of the homes in Franklin County. And also, so Franklin County had a reduction in occupied housing units of 5%. But that's almost all explained by this other vacant category, the total housing units went down by 1%. And that's easily explained by the gains in other vacant. Other vacant, a lot of times, are homes that had a senior in them, and then the senior moved out for whatever reason. The family's like, oh, let's just hold on to the house for a little while. Or it's kind of in this stasis, this ether, right, that nothing's happening with it. Nobody is living there, and all it's doing is aging. So we start to see these characteristics here. So Howard County, again, your baby boomers are moving over, and here's the composition of your homeowners. Kearney County, 31% over the age of 75, another 43% are baby boomers. Not big gains. They had actually, your housing units are stable. This should be success, right? If you are holding steady on your housing units, you are winning at this point. But even so, we can't control private decisions which lead to vacant homes either. So we'll talk about the implications of that, about why you should care. So we got all the counties data in here, Merritt County. If you want any more personal kind of explanations, please feel free to reach out to me via email. But again, all this will be made available to you here at Nuckolls County. Again, almost all of the reduction in number of occupied or number of housing units is explained by a rise in other vacant. Phelps County, your boomers are continuing to move over in big numbers, and about 30, 50, 75% of your homes are going to turn over in the next 20 years. So again, almost all the reductions you see in total housing units can be explained by other vacant. So now, let me see where I am here. So really, what's coming? Is this going to be a big disaster, or is this going to be an opportunity for us? Because like if the narrative is that nobody ever lives in rural communities, then my kind of advice to seniors right now is you better sell your house now. Why, there's a market, right? Because if you think rural's all dying, you better get out while you can. But really, there has not been much research on this. So I've gathered a few articles and whatnot, and you see it, will housing take another hit as boomers sell, aging America? So like we went through one housing crisis, and you could almost imagine that if the millennial home ownership rate continues to decline, that there will not be enough potential homeowners to make up for all the homes that are going to go on the market. So again, if 80% of your homes are going to go on the market, but only 78% of them can be occupied by demand, who's going to win and who's going to lose in that? So again, there might be a reason that people's ears should be perking up at some of this information. So I just want to frame this in terms of three things. It's moving in, moving out, and moving over. And so moving in is the brain gain. We talked about this at length in the rural narrative presentation in February or March. But what this is we do know, and it's been well documented now, that we've had a brain gain. Cheryl Burkhart-Kreisel's here on the call too. She was a pioneer in the research in Nebraska, and we partnered with Nebraska at the time to do research in Minnesota and Nebraska on this brain gain. And we asked, and we started to, really it amazed us, number one, that, hey, there's actually people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s moving to rural communities. And this is actually really good news for us. And what we find then is not only has this been happening in the 90s and 2000s, this has been going on since the 70s. This migration of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s moving in is not new. Also, losing your young people is not new. The brain drain, right? Like, your kids are still going to move out after graduation, and telling them to stay is probably some of the worst strategy you can have for community development, like ever. You want more resentment by your 18-year-olds, tell them they can't leave town, right? So meanwhile, we asked newcomers, why did you move there? And the top three reasons that people gave were, number one, a simpler pace of life. Number two, safety and security. And number three is the low cost of housing. So there is a demand for rural living. And a lot of times these new people moving into our communities are not from there. Just a third of newcomers had lived there before. And only half of the households have kids. And we thought those numbers were going to be much higher. We thought, the new people moving in had like grown up there and then moved away and now moved back, right? They call them boomerangs or returnees or whatever you want to call it. But really just 1 in 3 of the new people moving into your rural communities are returnees. So the Pew Research Institute did a study a number of years ago that asked Americans, like, all right, we know that just 20% of you live in small towns and rural places, and 80% of you live in urban places, but if you could live wherever you wanted, where would you want to live? And 51% of Americans said they'd prefer to live in small towns or a rural place. And so there is an inherent demand for rural living. So my point is, like, why don't they? Why don't they live there? I think, the tight housing supply aside, I would argue that the narrative about rural is so negative, they think they never could. Like, why would aren't you all dying, right? Why would I live to a dying town, right? So and also, like, we've got a diverse economy. We're not all farmers, right? We've got a very diverse economy regionally. Not every town does, but when you put 3 to 5 counties together, you end up with the same occupational and industrial diversity you find in metropolitan areas. So we live in the middle of this region. So on the moving in side, like, that's not a problem. There are people that continue to move in. In fact, if you saw the New York Times this past weekend, there was an article that cited the brain gain research. Sunday, it was an opinion article by Sarah Smarsh, who's an author that talked about rural living. And so we're starting to see a lot of traction nationally around this new rural narrative and around recognizing that there might actually be some advantages to living in small towns and rural places. So we also know that the home ownership rates have kind of gone down. And why have they gone down? I would argue they've gone down because seniors just don't move out of their homes. Very simply, we end up having people live in their homes well past, I would say, the safe time for their own personal life, and in many ways well past the lifehood of where their house should be, because ultimately that house ends up receiving little to no maintenance. And we'll talk about this policy that seniors have, but ultimately what we see is home ownership rates of seniors going up, which kind of results in a decline in the percentage of younger people owning homes. We're starting to also see trends around multi-generational housing. And what I mean here is that, and I say return to multi-generational housing, where we've got more and more percentage of our homes are multi-generational. Either your parents are living with you, like I'm going to take care of my mom, she's kind of at the end of her life and she's just going to move in with us, or the parents are bringing their grandkids in and helping their family out, you know. And I say return because it used to be this way. It used to be in the early 1900s, this was a way of life. And it wasn't until the 50s, 60s that there was an ideal for a nuclear household. Really, you were successful when you're able to move out of your parents' house, get married, and have your kids. And ultimately, you know, we started to see this play out. But since 1980, we've seen nothing but a rise in this multi-generational housing. So we can expect average household size to go up a little bit after these seniors start moving out. Now, but the composition of our housing is changing continually. Now, sometimes people are going to move out. Retirees and seniors are moving out. And of course, when people move out, that's going to provide some supply for your housing. Oh
my God, my kids have to, so just wandering out of language there. But really, it is the seniors today.
Ben,
Yeah.
I think we've got a disconnect with your microphone.
Oh, all right. Let me fix this quick.
You're very echoey. I apologize. Something changed there.
Okay, let me try to fix
There you go. You're back.
Yeah, I'm just going to change my mic side of stuff here. Where is this? Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is. So you still hear me all right?
Yeah, you're better. Thank you.
Okay, so really for seniors, before there's a continuum of care, which is, you know, when you actually need medical services and whatnot, there's a continuum of life. And it's really not a straight line. Like, we want to talk about all these different residential decisions that people can make during this post-retirement life that people have. But even before that, there's kind of a disconnect between when people expect to retire and when people actually retire. So generally, 9% of people say that, you know, I'm going to retire when I'm under 60, just 9%. But in actuality, almost 40% of Americans end up retiring before the age of 60. You know, and even 38% of people are like, I'm going to work till I'm over 70, you know, and then ultimately only 4%. So we're starting to see this disconnect between what people intend to do and what they actually do. And we're going to talk about this. Now, some people in your community are going to be drawn to new places. Like, people, when they retire, they want to move closer to their kids, and there's nothing you can do to really keep them, right? They're going to move out regardless of what happens. And some people are going to need medical care. And if you don't have a clinic or a hospital or a pharmacy or access to that, at least part-time, that people are going to move out there as well. So you've got people moving out, but some people are staying put. And this is what I call the policy of best intentions. And what I mean by that is when seniors say, I'm going to live in my house forever. That's not a policy. Nor can we really actually make decisions based upon some of these characteristics of the individuals. So really, 90% of seniors intend to stay in their home. But after they're in there, only 43% of those over the age of 70 found it actually easy to do that. So, and then why don't people move? They've got stress of moving, fear over losing independence, anxiety over leaving the community, emotional ties to their home, and really just fear of the unknown. And a lot of times when you think about this, people don't end up moving until they're in emergency mode, right? So you end up in situations where people are like, I'm going to live in my house forever. And so they invest like $5,000 in upgrading the bathroom and $2,000 for a handicap ramp into the house, just to make it easier for them to live there. And we do have all these like aging in place strategies out there to keep people there. So, you know, individuals will do this. They will start living in an atmosphere that's more accommodating to them. But then, because this is their best intention, literally months later, they're like, I can't live here anymore. Something happened, right? And then ultimately, now it's emergency mode. Now they're forced to move in a way that, again, makes them stressed. Their fear of lose, like all of these things really hit the high road at that time. And then the family is finally introduced into this decision-making model that the seniors have, which is, well, I'm moving from my policy of best intentions, which is live here forever. And now the family comes in and starts, like, well, let's look at selling the house and whatnot. And many times the real estate agent will come back and say, well, I'd love to sell your house, but you've got like knob and tube wiring. And nobody can hardly get insurance on knob and tube wiring anymore. So you're gonna have to upgrade the wiring. Or like you've got peeling paint, right? And no, you can't become eligible for a first-time home buyer if you've got peeling paint. So now the agent comes back and says, well, it's gonna cost you like $12,000 to get the house ready to sell to the individual and the family. And of course, then they're like, well, oh no, I just spent $7,000 putting in, upgrading my bathroom and putting on the ramp. Well, that bathroom and that ramp are not asset builders for your house. That's not on any, brain gainer checklist is to have a ramp on the front of the house. So ultimately, those things that individual just did in that house are not an asset builder. They're a pure expense. So now we are in this situation where, again, the family feels even more stressed. You've got even poorer decisions that get made because they're made under emotional and financial stress. And so, but we do have like all these strategies for aging in place, right? We hear about age in place, but I want to argue that aging in place should not mean aging in your home all the time. And we need to tease these things out because there are plenty of surveys out there too that ask seniors like, where would you want to live? And folks are like, I want to be in town. And that, that is also a place. But right now we've got like millions of dollars of incentives to keep people in their house. And we're not really exploring all these move over opportunities that people may have. So what happens long term? Long term, a lot of times individuals, this will just lower your equity of your home because maintenance or upgrades are not done. And this can result in dilapidation. So again, you remember earlier, that other vacant category keeps going up. That other vacant category now puts you at great risk for dilapidation. And what happens when a property becomes dilapidated? It goes to the state, and then the county takes it, and then the city gets it, and then you got to spend, $3,000 to $5,000 or more to demolish that thing, and then you try to do something with the land. And it's easy to say, all right, well, that's just what happens. This is what happens when individuals make their decisions, and the public, i.e., like public officials or public agencies, like we shouldn't care about this, right? Because we're just going to leave it up to individuals. Well, what's the public cost of inaction right now? Let's look at this. What's the impact of one dilapidated property in a community? Now, this is overstated, right? Like imagine a town has 4 homes and one of them becomes dilapidated. Well, before that, every home, you're assessed by the county. Let's say every home and parcel of land brought in $1,000 in property tax revenue. Well, after that place becomes demolished, you're only assessed on the land and not the structure because there's no structure there. So now that property is only going to be assessed to $200. Well, now, because this house became demolished, does the county reduce their levy by $800 because John's house got torn down? Certainly not. So who's going to make up for that $800 shortfall? Everybody else. Everybody else's property taxes go up because that one individual made a decision that's going to impact that one parcel. Now, not only then does that house get taken out of the potential supply for your community, but it also becomes a burden on property taxes. And it may not be much now, but add up. Like what happens if 10 to 15% of those other vacants become demolished? Just go to your assessor's office and ask how many of the vacant properties, and then calculate that figure. Take the number of properties, take their property taxes, knock off 80% of that, and then apply the other 80% to everybody else, and where are their property taxes going to be? So really, we need to advance a conversation here to earlier, before you become emergency mode conversation. And that a lot of times, equity in a senior equity in their own home is the primary composition of net worth, right? 32% of a senior's net worth is equity in the home. But many times seniors don't see equity as something that can be used, right? If we're talking about moving over, like, hey, we've got some single floor living, condos available in town that would be perfect for you, they'll be like, well, I own my house. Why would I buy that? Well, you have equity as well, right? That can be shifted. So I want to talk about home equity also persists as a measure of growing community wealth, but it's not always seen as something that can be tapped. So now we end up with more questions to ask, and we look at, why do people move? And, some people move to downsize. That's number one reason, downsize into a smaller home. I can't tell you how many households I talk to seniors about where they're like, yeah, I still live in my 2-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and the bathroom upstairs doesn't work, but that's fine because I don't go upstairs anymore. And that's like, what? Like that doesn't make it better that your home becomes in worse shape over the years, right? So some people are, I would argue, smartly downsizing into a smaller home. Some people are reducing expenses. These are moving out people, starting a new chapter. A lot of times they're moving out or moving closer to family and friends, moving to an aging-friendly home, became widowed. Like all of these become motivations for moving. So then I also want to bring up, like, why should economic developers care? Right? Because a lot of time, like, well, this is housing. I don't care about that. We have an HRA that deals with, or because we want to silo this out all the time. But now I want to introduce a concept around transfer receipts, retirement dollars and transfer receipts. So when we think about the economy in a rural community, did I get out of the PowerPoint there? You see that? I must have, right?
We just have a different view.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I didn't even notice that popped out there. So essentially, I want to look at all the income that comes into accounting, right? And a lot of times we think of income as the jobs that people have. Well, jobs make up, not all of the income that people make in the community. Some of this can come from transfer receipts, which we'll talk about this in a second. This is old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And another portion comes from dividends, interest, and rent. So now here we look at Franklin County. It's hard to see. I have people blocking this. Right here in Franklin County, 26% of all the income in the county comes from transfer receipts. And this is, again, old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And think about this now. When you're earning retirement dollars, almost all those dollars get spent in the local community. Like when you're retired and you get your retirement money, you're not putting money away for retirement anymore, right? You're spending all these dollars. And at the same time, Medicare and Medicaid are pass-throughs. So right now, $1 in $4 in Franklin County goes to an individual to be spent for retirement or gets passed through to your clinics, your hospitals, your pharmacies. Like imagine right now how many jobs are dependent solely upon the senior population and these transfer receipts. So now if you're an economic developer, why should you care? Because what if you don't have anywhere for seniors to move over to? If you don't have any during the continuum of life, right? I'm not talking always about continuum of care, but even during their continuum of life, if you don't have anywhere for them to move over to, are you ready to lose 25% of your income economy, right? This is the real question. Now, this only includes old age Social Security. These transfer receipts are federal transfers to individuals. Like this does not include 401ks. This doesn't include like Roth IRAs, that doesn't include any private retirement accounts. But we know that generally seniors, those over the age of 75, don't have a lot of diverse retirement accounts. It's only baby boomers because those 401ks and whatnot didn't even exist when some of our older folks were even in the workforce. So now we're starting to see that, all right, once we get a fuller picture of this, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to see this 26% bumped up to probably 40%. Of all the income in the county is going to be derived from these senior-related payments. So when we look at composition of, one other thing I just want to point out, when you look at the total income here again, just 45% of all the income in Franklin County comes from a job. And again, 26% are old age Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I hope this makes sense. You may not have ever heard of this before, but I just wanted to summarize then some of the counties here about the percentage of income that comes from a transfer. And Kearney County, I really don't know what's going on there. Do they have almost no seniors in this community? I don't know why this number is so low, or if the data from BEA was wrong. And then I could actually help them correct this. But really, then when you look at the distribution of the income from that job, too, anywhere from 45 to 60%, 65% of income comes from a job. So really our local service economy is only going to become more integrated with boomer related services and senior related services. And, I'll make a value statement here. Like, we should want to retain these transfer receipts. Like so maybe moving over housing is really the best opportunity, because when we offer moving over housing, you open up housing for the workforce. You open up housing for the brain gain. You open up the housing for young people to move in. So senior housing open up, oh, there it is. Senior housing opens up workforce housing. So again, like this workforce housing shortage before, and it doesn't make a lot of sense just to start building $220,000 homes to try to address a workforce housing problem when that home like immediately becomes appraised at 180, right? Who's going to take a $40,000 hit for the good of the community? Like, okay, unless it's your forever home or something, I don't know anybody that's going to really do that. So we can build supply and workforce housing by making the existing housing stock available. So hopefully I've made the argument in many ways that housing is kind of the key here. A house is not just a private asset, but also a community asset that persists over time. So really, we don't have, there's a lot of things that people try and like a lot of ideas. There's not really anybody putting it together. And the bottom line is I don't have answers. This is the data that tells me what's coming, right? So then you talk about what point of change do we have control over? Vacant property, new property, property entering the market. Like, should we work with the buyers or sellers? And sometimes, we have foundations working with construction folks and lumber yards for the first time ever to make sure our homes are in good enough shape to actually sell. And really, then we start really encouraging the talent pipeline and to show folks, look at how many homes are going to go on the market in the next 20 years. How many plumbers, how many electricians, how many jobs are there going to be to help keep our housing stock in shape? And before I start hearing people say, well, oh my gosh, my house is so old. It was built in 1907. Which was my house in Hancock, right? Like, okay, yeah, my house was built in 1907, but if you think that house is old, don't ever go to the East Coast where you have homes that are like 220 years old. Like, there are ways to keep our housing stock in good shape. But there's a lot of challenges here. Number one, we don't have data regarding the condition on the inside of the house, right? We could do windshield surveys and be like, oh, it looks like the roof has fallen off, or it looks like the siding is melted, or whatever, right? But we don't know if they have a knob and tube. We don't know if they have like some terrible plumbing in there. We don't know if they have no insulation. You probably could proxy for insulation by looking at the homes that have ice dams on them, because if they've got ice dams, that means they've got no insulation, basically. So, but again, like trying to find some way to get inside the house to find out what that is. We've got a lack of data regarding intentions by those living in the house. Like, what do you want to do? Start actually asking the seniors in your community if they would entertain the idea of moving over. So do not wait for emergency mode decision making, because your costs are mega high at that point. We've also got a lack of data regarding the needs of those that want to live in the house. So what I mean by that is like open space concepts. Like my house in Hancock was a traditional 4 square with 4 walls that divided, or a wall that divided every room. And we just knocked out 2 walls, like the non-load bearing walls, right? So you want to, not be destroying your house as you're rehabbing it, but really like there might be small things that you can do to help encourage and to make the house more attractive, or you can just work with the buyers and, don't make the mistake I did, which is try to rehab the house as you live in it. Like if there's a period of time that you could actually rehab it before you move in, that might be a great thing. The biggest challenge for me is the people already there. Engaging the seniors and their families. We can do this through focus groups, through surveys, which are a little more impersonal, and just start to get at these intentions. And, start to get at, what would you want in town? What do you need in town for you to stay? And really, for me, this is just like the transfer of wealth. I want to appeal to a sense of continuity for these families. And what I mean by this is reminding seniors that, yes, this was your house. You raised your family here, but we also want the next generation in here. We actually have a generation of people that want to live in your town. And will you help us ensure that the house is going to be here for people in the future? Because again, after it's your home, we want it to be a home for someone else, right? So really expand the conversation about housing, engage newcomers in some of this, and build a model for housing demand. And ideally, it's just rewriting your narrative. It's getting to the point that, if you talk so negatively about your town, nobody's going to want to live there. But I'll remind you, like the future of your community is in the hands of people that aren't even here yet. Like those people aren't even here yet. Those 80% of homeowners aren't here yet. They may have been born at this point, but they're not living here yet. So maybe one of the best things you can do for the future of your community is ensure there's somewhere for people to live. And to do this, we have to be a little more proactive. I would argue that, again, like I said at the beginning, like now you can't say you don't see this coming, right? This is coming, whether you like it or not. This is demographic destiny. So we can either, continue to respond to change as we go, or we can actually lead action in these areas. And we may end up having to build partnerships that may not have existed before, right? We may need economic developers caring about housing at this point, and really just start engaging our communities and lead a conversation about the future. So, and I think I just like wordles occasionally from, community activities that we do. Like, people have really great things to say. You ask newcomers what they love about your town, and they will go on and on. They will counter your negative narrative. So really, this allows us to be proactive, to talk about the future of our town, and to talk about how we live in the middle of everywhere. So just thanks to Scott again for inviting me to be back here. Thanks Lori, Sharon, and Sherry for having me back. And we got a little bit of time for questions. All right, so I flew through this. So, okay, I did it.
We'll let you take a breath here, Ben, and just say thank you. Your passion for rural America is obvious. And can you privately send me your vitamin list, maybe after the fact? Because whatever
beef jerky, lots of beef jerky. No.
Yeah. So, but I just want to point out that Dina did put in the chat box that the Nebraska Community Foundation has information on, and I lost it. Hold on. The transfer of wealth. So email Dina. Her email address is in the chat box. We had one question entered during your presentation, Ben. So it comes from Steve. He said that does the percent of senior-owned homes that you described take into account the age and condition of these houses? And perhaps you answered that.
No, not really. I mean, it doesn't, because the data on age and condition is terrible. It used to be that we would have decennial census data that really dove into the characteristics of a person's home, but the last time we had very good data was the year 2000. Okay. So right now we've got what's called American Community Survey data, which has a terribly high margin of error. So it's like, how many homes are over 60 years old? It's 112 plus or minus 70. So it's like anywhere between 40 to 180, like it's somewhere in there. Like, so it's very difficult to do planning. But again, I'm not concerned about the age of the home. I'm concerned about the condition of the home, because condition can be repaired.
Okay.
I wonder how accurate, our county assessors in Nebraska go out and look at the homes and sometimes get in. She knocked on my door this summer and I wasn't there, and then I was gone for a couple weeks and they sent us stuff, but I don't think I ever sent it back. I started to one night, but so, obviously if she didn't get in, she had to make some assumptions. But I wonder, when we pull that from, in Nebraska, GIS Workshop does 88, I think, of the 93 counties. And if we get permission from the community and all, we can, or the county assessor, we can pull that. And they give a condition and they give a quality. Is that right, Sherry? Condition and quality. And I wonder if that would be, we could pull that for some of them and it would be maybe a little closer. It's not going to give you specifics, but Ben, I'm curious, one of the challenges for some of us that live here, and we know, we're in the middle of nowhere. And in my mind, I know that means I'm in the middle of everywhere, because I have a son in Idaho and a daughter in Houston. And if I didn't live here, I'd be more than 20 hours from one of them, but so I think that's pretty great. But who do if we were to say, okay, we want to have a session at some point on writing that, what do you think that looks like? Give us a few topics of turning that around. Obviously, I live in the middle of nowhere. No, I live in the middle. I can get to anywhere. But what are some of those things that you think we should be saying?
For the narrative stuff, so really that first presentation I did goes in depth into all of these, which is, I just want to remind everybody that our county boundaries were drawn during a time of horse and buggy, and that they don't really reflect modern rural life, that we live in these large regions. People live in one place, they work in another. We mostly work in regional centers. Now, it used to be we had a lot of jobs in every town, but that changed. You know, it shifted. We talked about that earlier. And that we live in the middle. We live in one place. We work in a connected community. We shop and eat out within up to an hour away from our house, and then we play up to 2 to 3 hours away from our community. So that is the middle of everywhere. And if you can't, so this kind of gets to the really parochial stuff in our small town. Is that I give this example of, like, if I'm looking at moving to Hancock, right, and I run into the mayor, and I was like, hey, Mrs. Mayor, I'm looking at moving to Hancock. And then, of course, the mayor is like, Hancock's great. We have a full K-12 school, and we have a C-store / car sales / deli / hairstylist on the corner. And, like, they name off all these things. And I say, well, I'm also looking at moving to Starbucks, which is like 15 miles away. And because we're really parochial about that, you'll say things like, oh, you don't want to move to Starbucks. You know, they got nothing going on there. It's all here. Well, now you just portrayed yourself as in the middle of nowhere. Because if you can't name off anything else that I might actually enjoy to do in a region outside of where I live, you're doing a disservice not just to them, but to yourself. Because I don't want to live here now if you can't name off some of these assets that you've got in the middle of everywhere. And you can do that. We have an exercise that we do called Living in the Middle of Everywhere. We actually kind of draw that out. And what you find out, though, is you've got differences, too, in that how people describe what there is to do. So number one is people on your front lines in your hotel, motel, or your gas station. Like, I go to gas stations all the time and, like, what's there fun to do around here? And the number one answer is nothing. I'm like, okay, like you're on the front lines. You're portraying your community to all these people coming in. And hotel, motel folks a lot of times like, oh no, look at the stack of flyers over there. Right? You got your, so you've got these kind of atmospheric things, but at the same time, a lot of our marketing is written by people for themselves. And I can almost tell how old the people are on the marketing committee by the marketing materials. Because what we find through this middle of everywhere exercise is what people in their 30s look for in terms of assets in the middle of everywhere is vastly different than what the 60-year-olds are looking for in their middle of everywhere. So you don't have just one community. We have multiple communities in our towns. Like, inherent in the definition of community is a boundary, and it's almost never physical anymore. So it is around interest. It's all around, it might be a very broad geography. But so other data points I have about the positive narrative is the number of nonprofits in your communities keeps going up, like by huge numbers, to the point that, you know, you've got more people and they're engaging with one another enough that they're creating new nonprofits. So the idea that people don't want to be involved is false. It's that they don't want to be involved in necessarily the chamber or the Lions, but they want to be in the bicycling group or the, you know, cross-country skiing groups and the health and wellness and recreation and sports. And, like, we know where all the growth is. But we focus our negative narrative on the, you know, lack of Eagles and Lions clubs, and obviously people don't care about this community anymore. And, like, well, yeah, it depends where you look, right? So there's a few things.
Okay, thanks, Ben. What other questions are there out there for Ben? Or what is, I'm sorry, did somebody have something? Okay, I thought I heard somebody start to say something. So tell us, those of you who are on the webinar, what resonated with you today? What's something you want to think about, take back to a group or to your community or a committee or your boss? What is something that really resonated with you today?
As you type that in, I just want to follow up on a comment too about the senior occupied homes and data sets out there. I find it much more effective to actually make this personal with the seniors and say, you know, if there are opportunities to actually, like, hey, can we go through your house? And it's not, we've got to be very clear, it's not like an inspection. It's not like they're going to be forced to move out of their home. It's, as you start to think about transitioning, here are things you should care about with regards to your home that can inhibit its sale, for example. So, sorry.
Okay. Mike offered in the chat box, kind of as a confirmation of what you're saying, but that their workforce housing is tied up with seniors. So when you first said 75% of the housing would change in 20 years, I thought, oh, surely not. But you definitely proved that today. So Paula offers the comment that aging in place add-ons do not add value to the house. that was something that resonated with her. So yeah, so definitely, as I start to approach that horizon of changing, I'm thinking, yeah, that was new for me too, that maybe we shouldn't make those upgrades as we begin to need them, but to look beyond the horizon, so to speak. So good thoughts. What else?
Well, this might be a shameless plug, but I believe he's given me fuel to be even more excited about our November gathering, where we're going to talk about purchase, rehab, resale. Just for that very reason, we have tired housing stock that we need to bring back to life. A lot of times a young family, new job, starting a business, kids, they can't afford to live one place, own a second, be rehabbing it. They don't want to do what Ben did and live in it while they're rehabbing it. And I get it. I just did that 2 years ago. It wasn't very fun. And so we need to be stepping up in our communities and investing and encouraging people to invest. And so I'm excited to hear how other communities are tackling that.
Good.
We'll do that in November.
Kind of that wind beneath our wings as we plan for November, Sharon. So
That's it.
good. So Ben, you mentioned it, are you available for future conversations? And if so, do you want to just share your email quickly with us?
Sure. I think we can share it when you send out a PowerPoint too.
Okay.
Perfect. I'll throw it into chat. Or I think it was on, oh yeah, oh, that's not there anymore.
Okay. And yes, we'll probably have it on some of your slides. Or
Right.
there it is, Ben W at U, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy.edu. So
But really, I just want to remind everyone that I'm not a housing person. Like, I'm the data geek. Like, because I've learned a lot. Like, basically what you heard today is a result of like 3 years of like presenting and hearing from communities. Like, we don't know enough about this. So, I mean,
Okay.
if you have next steps for me to do more research on certain things, I'd be happy to hear it too.
Okay, perfect. We'd love to hear as you get those requests, we'd love to hear what the feedback is and what the data reveals to you. So just quickly, Sharon did mention our HomeNE gathering coming up in November. I just want to touch on that as we begin to wrap up for the afternoon. That is November 7th and 8th here in Holdridge. And I believe that registration went live for that this week, correct, Sherry? So check that out. There is the link at the bottom of our slide there for that. So
as long as we're doing shameless plugs, I want to say Ben's going to be at the Nebraska Community Foundation annual training on November 14th in York. So if you want to see more than his picture on the screen, you can come join us in York.
okay, what was that date again?
November 14th.
Okay.
That's right. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So mark that date on your calendar as well. So do HomeNE and then go to the Nebraska Community Foundation. So, so once again, before I wrap up here, I want to thank Ben for his time and his involvement here. Our next webinar is going to be October 17th, right back here on the third Thursday of October. And I'm excited to have Chad Nabity joining us. He is the Hall County Regional Planner. And he will be speaking on the topic of looking for a housing partner and look no further than your CRA. And okay, Sharon also put something in the chat box about a virtual social hour. So share that with us.
Mike Knutson from Dakota Resources just shared that they will be hosting a virtual social hour next Thursday for economic development professionals in South Dakota. And they'll be talking about how outsiders portray rural and how what we want that to be. And so I put it in the chat, but Mike, you got anything else to say about that?
Well, what we do is we go to a bar, we get together at 5:30 at night, have a beer or a social, whatever you want, and just have a little conversation. There's no real preconceived learning. It's just, let's talk about this thing. And like I say, Michelle Anderson's going to join us. I'm sure that Ben knows Michelle.
Now, wait a minute. How is it virtual if you go to a bar?
Well, we do it over Zoom.
Okay, so everybody goes to their own bar. Okay, I get it now.
Around the state, so we're all doing it virtually.
Is there a way we can find a way to tie into that, or?
Yeah, if you're interested, I can get you the Zoom link. We'd like to maybe know if you're coming along, and just let us know, but we can sure share that with you.
Perfect.
Wonderful.
That would be great, Mike. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah. So I just had this statement put on the screen. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. I heard this on a podcast a couple weeks ago that is HomeNE presenters and lead agents and such. We really want to hear from you. How is this impacting you? We're always looking for success stories, and it doesn't have to be a gigantic success, just if you've made some inroads in your community with something you've heard here on HomeNE, something that you're implementing. We want to hear about it so that we can perhaps use it in a future gathering or a future webinar. We just really want to hear from you, or if you have ideas of things that are happening in your part of the state or the region that we could maybe incorporate at some future time. We would love to hear that. It makes us all better when you actively participate and share with us what you know and what you're experiencing. So just drop Sharon or Levi or myself an email and give us that feedback, and how can we improve to better serve you. As Sharon said earlier, that we're really preparing the soil for future growth in the housing industry or the housing world. So we want to know how better to till that soil so that seeds can be planted. So with that, have I missed anything that you can think of, Sharon? Okay. So with that, if there are any last minute questions or comments, I just want to say thank you again to Ben for participating and for bringing us great information. And thank you to all of you for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.